Good afternoon and welcome to the Nuts and Bolts Show. I'm Don.
And I'm Sean. So today's topic is the trial of Derrick Chauvin, the former Minneapolis police officer that was recently convicted of second-degree murder, among other charges, in the killing of George Floyd. And I think this is a video that a lot of people in the country, as well as around the world, have seen. Don, what were your thoughts when you first saw the video of George Floyd's death?
Well, before we get into that, I want to say that, we try to have a lot of fun here on the Nuts and Bolts Show. And we did say way back when we first started, sometimes we'll do serious conversations or topics. This would be one of them. It isn't going to be, I don't think, our favorite show, but I think it's an important show to discuss because it had such a huge impact on the country.
Yeah, definitely.
When it happened, Sean, if you remember back, we were all in lockdown. I was in Rhode Island, and I don't know where you were. I'm assuming you were home in where you live, without saying where you live, because who knows, you might get some strange visitors.
Yep.
But I think that everybody in the country, when they saw that video, realized they just saw something that was horrific. And I remember my wife at the time, my fiance, asked me, what do you think of what you just saw? And I was quiet for a little bit because I really didn't know what to say. Because when you look at something, and not necessarily this particular video, but when you look at something that's reported, a crime or whatever, most people, you try to wait for all the facts to come out, or not necessarily go by one piece of video. You want to see all of the video because it paints the full picture. But it was really hard to get around that video because it was really, like I said, it was horrific. We watched a man die on TV. So let's move on to the actual trial. And I probably watched a good 80% of it and tried to keep up with it. Obviously, with work and everything, it's difficult to do. I'm sure it is for you as well. Right off the bat, though, Sean, did you see anything that you would consider to be good or bad on either side, prosecuting team, defense team, and so on?
Yeah, well, the first thing I want to say is I think that going into the trial, the defense attorney knew that he had a tough job ahead of him. And I think in jury selection, they knew that they had a tough time finding people who had no, preconception of what had happened, because that was such a widely circulated video. So I think from the start, the defense really knew he didn't have much of a shot, to be honest.
Well, yeah, I would agree that they had a tall task. But I actually think that the defense did a pretty good job trying their case, as did the prosecution. I mean, really, when you think about it, the prosecution, if all they did was continuously show that 9 seconds and nothing else, the outcome may still have been the same.
I think it would have. I really do.
Yeah, really, I agree. Where I feel the defense was, where they scored some points, was with the coroner, who admitted that the knee placement on Floyd's neck did not necessarily cause any kind of conflict in breathing. He also stated, this guy was Dr. Baker, who did the autopsy, I should say, and talked about that there really wasn't any kind of bruising or things that you would see with asphyxiation in the neck or anything like that. He said there wasn't those signs, and then relied on the other factors, medically about Floyd, that he believed contributed to his death.
Well, I would say that to the jury, I don't think they did a good job at all, because it only took about 9 hours, which is a relatively short period of time for them to convict.
Well, we can talk about that, but let's hold that off for just a minute, because I have an opinion on that too, and I'm sure you probably do. So I thought that, when you're watching that trial, now I'll go back to the beginning. When you and I and everybody else saw that video, Sean, we believed we just saw something really, really bad, and it is really, really bad. But what we didn't see is everything else that happened before that or after that. And when the defense put all that in there, it does change perception a little bit. but about George Floyd himself, who he was. Not a very, not a very good guy.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he was a good guy or not.
I think it does to an extent, because they showed video of a incident prior where he was stopped by the police.
I saw it.
So,
Yeah.
and immediately he's calling for his mom. He's telling yelling out, like, don't shoot me, I don't want to die.
Well, to be fair, though, the officer approached him with his gun drawn.
Well, it's, like, listen, I don't think Floyd was cooperative. So I think that's something that if you're not cooperative and you're not listening, because that officer told him put his hands on the dash and he wouldn't do it. So
Yeah, but the thing is the officer approached with the gun drawn prior to interacting with him. So if somebody walks up to my car with a gun on me, I'm going to be a little on edge as well.
I'm going to listen to the officer. That's what I'm going to do. That's what I'm going to do. But besides that, it doesn't matter. Like, it matters, but at the same time, it doesn't matter who George Floyd was. He wasn't a good guy. He did not deserve to die. So when we watch that video, remember, he does. He calls out for his mom. Before that, though, before they even get him into the car, where he then escaped from the car, he was saying he couldn't breathe. So he was stating that the whole time, even before going onto the ground, calling out for his mom. As well as I do, that some people will put on a show to whatever, like to avoid conflict. Maybe they'll stop bothering me. Maybe they'll let me go. And that could have been it. He could have been doing that as well. Remember the liquid, so when we're watching this again, for the very first time, we see this stream of water come from where he's laying down on the ground. And a lot of people felt, oh my God, that, he's so scared that he peed himself. That's what a lot of people felt. Do you remember that part?
Yes.
And it turned out to be, do you know what it turned out to be?
I do not.
It was water coming from the patrol car. So when you think about that, it adds to the anger. It adds to the perception that, the police just did something horrible.
Well, I mean, that's besides the point, but I think that, I don't know about the police as a whole, but Derrick Chauvin definitely did something horrible.
Well, let's continue then. Before the trial that day and the days to follow, one of the narratives was that it was a racially motivated incident. And the media, politicians, would claim that all four officers, it was a racist thing that they have done. This man died because they were racist. They did not like George Floyd.
I don't see how anybody could say that. I mean, show me evidence that any of them are racist, and I'll look at it. But from watching that video, don't see what makes it racist personally.
Well, guess what? I mean, Sean, if you said you watched it too, so that never even came up. And when you watch all of the video, it never came up in the trial at all. And when you watch the video, all of the video from start to finish, I would agree that if they wanted to go that route, there really wasn't a lot there for that. I mean, I don't like what happened, and we'll expand on that further. But was it a racially motivated thing? I don't think so at all. And the media, which runs with it, even after it's over, with the verdict is over, they are still running with that. Certain politicians are running with that. Athletes are running with that. And that does a lot of damage. It can do a lot of damage to the country. But anyway, we'll talk to the end of the. So do you believe that the three charges were accurate? Are you good with the verdict?
Well, first of all, I think you should state the charges.
Second degree murder.
Convicted. Continue.
And what was the other one? Manslaughter was the third.
Yep. As well as third degree murder.
Right.
I think that the jury did a good job personally. I was a little bit confused on how somebody can be convicted for second degree and third degree murder regarding the same charge, like the same death, But I personally, throughout the entire trial, I mean, I think watching that video after George Floyd no longer was resisting, he no longer was posing a threat. There's no reason to keep your knee on his neck. I wasn't given the police training that he was. I have no idea what his rules and regulations are, but um, just as a person, I have the common sense to understand that if I think somebody's resisting, I put my knee on their neck. At some point, that's going to start to hurt them if I don't take that off.
Yeah. And, I'm going to go backwards just a little bit and go back to the corner. And really why I want to do that is I don't necessarily agree with the 3 charges that they convicted him on because of intent. The 2nd-degree murder, 3rd-degree murder had a lot to do with intent.
Okay.
So
I didn't know that.
They had to believe that Chauvin intended to do what he did to take the life of Floyd.
That's a good point. I didn't know that, but to that point, I don't think he intended to kill George Floyd. But what I do think happened is I think he is a stubborn SOB, really. I think he put his knee on his neck, and I think if the crowd wasn't there, he may have taken it off and put him in the side recovery position at some point. But I think because he was being yelled at, his ego came into play, and I think that stubbornness started to come out. And in his mind, he was thinking, F you guys on the sidewalk yelling at me. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. I don't think he was intending to kill him. I think that is such a stupid thing to do if he was. I don't think how that's a rational move if he was intending to kill him, that he did that.
And yeah, and to finish my prior thought with that is that the coroner was asked directly by the defense, was, in his opinion, through his autopsy and report, was the knee on the neck, did it compromise George Floyd's breathing? And his answer was no, he didn't believe so.
A different medical examiner said it did, though.
Yes, and that's a good point to bring up because there's only one autopsy, and the other experts that testified used the autopsy done by Dr. Baker, Coroner Baker, whatever you want to call him. They used his report to come up with their own thoughts and opinions. So, I don't know how much credit. I mean, these are doctors. I'm not going to say they're not smart individuals. They don't know their field. I'm sure they do. But reasonable doubt is where I would go with that. And as a juror, when you hear that, and that all the other things that went in there, methamphetamine, fentanyl, the coroner even said that he's had hundreds of cases of overdoses where people had that number or even lower of fentanyl in his system. I'm not saying that I'm an expert, but I do believe that played a huge role in it. I think the whole thing did. Everything played a role in his death, not just Derrick Chauvin. And to piggyback off of you a little bit, most of the people who testified, police officers, use of force trainers, no one had a problem with anything that happened until Floyd was not
combative. He was no longer a threat, so there was no need for his knee to remain on his neck.
When he stopped talking,
right,
and he stopped moving, that's the part that I can't get away from, no matter what. And I respect law enforcement. That's the part that I'm thinking the jurors, that's what they focused on. And he didn't get up. And I think to your point, Sean,
he was being a prick. He was being a prick.
His ego. And they were yelling at him and they were saying some, pretty vile things. But you know what? At the end of the day, no matter what we think, no matter what I think, the other thing I want to call out on the defense that initially I thought was a very good thing, a good tactic, but overused. They used the word reasonable officer multiple times. And they showed a graph that had little circles on how an officer does his job or her job on any given situation. And it was about reevaluating. You get to a point and then reevaluate.
Yep. And that's a consistent process that's done multiple times throughout an incident. Yep.
Correct.
Yep.
And at that point, he didn't reevaluate. In my opinion, he did not reevaluate the situation when Floyd stops moving, when Floyd stops talking. He really, there was no need for that. He could have moved. And if he did, Sean, this is a guy that's 44 years old. So this officer, he was close to retiring. Common sense to me would have told me at that point, I'm going to move to the side. And he didn't. So Chauvin deserves to be punished in some way. My only problem is I don't agree necessarily with how harsh it was because of the other factors and reasonable doubt. What say you?
Well, what I say is that I have no idea. I'm not a medical expert. All I can tell you is what I saw. And what I saw, what looked like, was a police officer who, I'd hate to say it, but let, I think, his position go to his head, or he's just a stubborn person and decided, I'm not going to do the right thing and I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. I think he may have had tunnel vision and he may have let rational thought go out the window, and he continued to keep his knee on his neck. I don't know if he intended to kill him. I hope to God he didn't. I really hope he didn't. I hope. But I don't know. I really don't know. I think, like you said, he definitely deserves to be punished. What he'll get, I don't know. The sentencing is coming up, I believe, in a week or two, something like that. But
Yeah.
the maximum just for second-degree murder is 40 years. So that is the maximum for that charge. That, accompanied with all the other charges that he was convicted of, he's potentially facing a life sentence, considering that he's 44.
Yeah. And let's, listen, it isn't a good situation. There's nothing good that comes out of this. George Floyd passes away, regardless of who he was, how he lived his life. Potentially, Chauvin is now going to be in jail for the rest of his life. So his family is impacted as well.
Yeah, I hope he is, to be honest with you. I mean, like you said, George Floyd, I don't think was a good guy, personally. I don't know him, so maybe he was, but from what I've seen, I don't think he is. But nobody deserves that. Nobody deserves to die like that.
Yeah. I mean, no, I agree. He didn't deserve to die, even though, and there's going to be people who probably aren't going to like what I say, but I believe a little bit more that it was the drugs that he ingested into his system during the altercation, prior to the altercation, his other medical things, that the enlarged heart and such. I think that played a role too.
How can you say that, though? What makes you say that?
What makes me say what?
That you think that the drugs played a role, the enlarged heart played a role. What makes you say that?
Well, I'm going by, listen, I'm not an expert in any stretch of the imagination, but I'm going by what the expert did say, that those did contribute to his death.
Right, but why do you believe that expert and not the other expert that said that they didn't?
Well, I think that I have an opinion. You have an opinion.
True.
And I'm gonna, the coroner who did the actual autopsy, he's done hundreds and hundreds and hundreds.
He ruled it a homicide.
Yeah, but if you pay attention to the actual verbiage, they're not, homicide is just a term that they used. It does not mean murder. That there are plenty of those types of incidents that are going to be labeled a homicide, but doesn't mean it was caused by an individual.
Well, it does technically.
It was called out at closing arguments by the defense, and even on the stand, the coroner even admitted that he does not know what the criminal term would be. It was in his profession, that's what he would label it. And then the detectives, the investigators, they then would research that and investigate that to determine if that homicide is then equal a murder. So that's what I got from his testimony.
That's true, but they did also go through all the other terms that he has available to label things like suicide, accident, things like that, which were ruled out.
Sure. That's my opinion, Sean. I think that played a big role, and more than, in my opinion, I think it played a bigger role than what Chauvin did. But Chauvin made the biggest mistake of his career, of his life, by not recognizing, and I don't want to keep beating that, that dead horse, but to not reevaluate the situation when he was motionless, no longer speaking. He should have.
To be honest with you, I think it should have been, before that. There's no reason to keep your knee on his neck if he's not fighting, if he's not kicking, if he's not punching.
Well,
you got to put him in the side recovery position.
A lot of the officers and defensive training guys or use of force guys said that isn't necessarily the case. That the officer has the right to do that, even if they stop kicking and whatever, because they are controlling that situation, the safety of the other officers, the safety of the person involved, and safety of people around them.
Right.
So
But just because he has the right to do that, he has to, like you said, continuously reevaluate the situation and think, should I do this?
listen, I'm not an officer. That's an extremely difficult job to do with split-second decisions.
Yep.
But I will say this, and this also may anger people. If George Floyd complied with these officers who arrived in that scene, he would be alive today. Bottom line. Now,
So what did he do that wasn't complying?
what did he do? He didn't comply at all. At any point did he comply.
Right. But what did he do, like, specifically that was not non-compliant? Because when they asked him to get out of the vehicle, he got out of the vehicle. When they asked him to sit on the sidewalk, he sat on the sidewalk. When they asked him to get in the car, he began to get into the car, but then stated that he was claustrophobic.
He fought them to get into that car. He didn't want to go anywhere. He started his whole, whatever you want to call it, whether like from the time of the incident, he didn't comply when he was in the original car initially. They had to tell him to put his hands in sight. They pulled their gun because they didn't know what was going on. Like we talked about before, like, Sean, if a cop comes up to me and for some reason I've given them a feeling where they need to pull their gun on me, I'm going to do everything that they tell me to do. And Floyd did not. He resisted, verbally and physically resisted. And if he did not do those things, he would be alive today. That's just obvious.
Yeah, I don't know. I think at some points he did comply at the start of the interaction, but I think you're right.
If he got into the patrol car,
Yes.
would he be alive today? If he got in and he sat down, would he be
And then
alive
what
today?
happened? Nothing happened. He went to the police station, was processed, and booked after that.
Right. If he got into the car and sat down, would he be alive today?
Sure, he would.
Bingo.
Sure he would.
End of story.
Yeah, but I mean, if the officers used a de-escalation tactic instead of physical aggression, I think
So
he'd
how
also be
long-
alive today.
How long do you talk to someone? I mean, I've seen this happen in person. An officer is only going to talk to someone for so long, whether it's to be handcuffed per policy from that department or getting into a patrol car. They're not going to sit there all day and have a discussion. Their job is to arrive to the scene and secure the scene, take care of the issue, and move on. He didn't get in the car, sit down. He'd be alive today.
Another factor to take into account is that George Floyd was clearly under the influence of something.
Yes. Yes,
So
he was.
clearly wasn't right. So he clearly wasn't in the right state of mind.
Yeah, but then so you dig deeper into the role of the officer and how much information they have to assimilate during that whole time, and the decisions that they have to make very quickly on somebody. And again, I think that they were reasonable all the way through until the last few minutes. I think everything was reasonable until the last few minutes. That's when they should have reanalyzed. They had him under control. They had him handcuffed. He stopped resisting. He stopped talking. They should have done something different at that point. But
I
everything
agree.
prior to that, I agree. I have no problem with it. None. Zero.
Yes. And what I'm saying is just because he resisted arrest doesn't mean it should have ended like the way it did.
No.
100%.
No.
That's the point I'm
I'm
making.
not saying that either. I'm not saying that either.
Mhm.
I'm not saying that, Sean. I'm saying if he didn't resist and he complied, he would, in fact, be alive today.
Yeah, but just because he did resist and did not comply doesn't mean he should have died.
No, I agree with that. I do. But I think there's a lesson to be learned here. There's multiple lessons to be. Like I said, this is not a good thing. This does nothing good for anybody. And there are people who are celebrating the verdict as this special thing that, thank God, we got one of those racist cops. I mean, just look at the signs they're holding out there. All cops are bad. All cops are Chauvin. Black lives matter. Blue lives don't. Blue lives or cops are murderers. That is destructive. It does nothing positive. There is nothing positive about this at all. A punishment should be handed down to Chauvin. No question about it. No question. But I'm not celebrating this. I think it's a horrible thing, and it hurts the country, especially when you have the president of the United States, Nancy Pelosi, Maxine Waters, and all these other people who want to point out that finally, and there's more to do with the racial injustice, and now we're going to have these big investigations on police departments. We're hurting ourselves at the same time. It does nothing good for the country. It actually pushes the country backwards.
This shouldn't have happened. And I think it's a really big tragedy that it did.
Yeah, and I think that we agree on most things. That the officer should have reevaluated, like we said, that he didn't deserve to die, despite who he is. He did not deserve to die. And I think that we agree that even though, despite what the media, what they want to make people believe, we don't look at it as a racial incident.
I mean, to be honest with you, though, I haven't really seen anything on the news that makes it out to be a racial thing.
All you have to do is look at the speeches that the president just did, Maxine Waters, Nancy Pelosi. Just look at what or CNN. Look at what they are, Sean, and that is a problem. It's a false narrative, but there's an agenda behind it that they're pushing, and we're going to see that even more. Like I said, with the girl, I'm not the girl, the 13-year-old boy that ran from the police. They're already saying that was a racially motivated shooting. I don't remember who said it now, and I wasn't prepared for this, but someone said a white cop just shot another black person. If that's not a racial statement, I don't know what is. And then you have the two girls that are in the knife fight, and the officer arrives and he's protecting the other girl who doesn't have the knife, and he shoots the girl with the knife and she dies. There we go again. The media calls that out to be racist. Matter of fact, today MSNBC was called out for lying and editing that tape because of the agenda that they want to push, because they only showed a portion of the tape where the girl didn't have a knife. And even CNN, a liberal station, called them out, another liberal station, for not presenting the full facts. So we got away from George Floyd a little bit, but that's because it's so much bigger than George Floyd. It's made bigger than George Floyd. As a horrible incident as it is, it's been made out to something that has grown, and I don't want to use this term because it's not a good thing, but a huge fire. So we had a long discussion here. It may have angered some people, maybe made some people think. Leave some comments below. Tell us what you think. And always, we appreciate you for coming on board on any of the shows that we do. Like, subscribe, and for Sean and myself, Sean.
See ya.
Later. And that was a presentation of the Nuts and Bolts Show.
Thanks for watching, guys. The Nuts and Boltz Show is on YouTube at The Nuts and Boltz Show, Twitter at The Nuts B, Facebook at The Nuts and Boltz, and you can listen to us on Spotify at The Nuts and Boltz Show. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe.